If I were to go find somebody rocking the Stylo 3 Plus, slap the Q Stylo Plus into their hands, and tell them that this phone comes from the same line for nearly the same price, there's a decent chance they wouldn't believe me. That's because for only an extra 50 Canadian dollars, this phone feels way more premium. If you haven't seen my Stylo 3 Plus review, I'll summarize it for you. I thought the phone was great as a budget offering, but had a lot of potential in the premium space as well. With the Q Stylo, it legitimately feels like LG listened to those thoughts and at least worked to find a middle ground. To start off, the build quality feels so much better than the Stylo 3 Plus, which honestly felt kind of cheap and plasticky. The Q Stylo, on the other hand, feels rock solid, even going so far as to incorporate a metal frame on a budget device like this, which is really nice. The whole thing feels really well built, and unlike the Stylo 3, the Q Stylo mirrors the current design of the G series of LG's lineup, and it feels a lot more like a legitimate offering because of it. Overall, the design and build quality are just much, much better than its predecessor. The specs are pretty solid too. We've got a Qualcomm Snapdragon 450 octa-core processor with Adreno 506 graphics, a 6.2-inch 2160 by 1080 display, 3 GB of RAM, 32 GB of internal storage with optional SD card expansion, a 3300 mAh non-removable battery, Android 8.1 out of the box, a 16 megapixel rear camera and 5 megapixel wide-angle front camera for fitting everyone into your group selfies, and IP68 water and dust resistance, which is a really, really nice inclusion on a phone this price range. Now let's go through in a little more depth. It's true, the Snapdragon 450 isn't the most powerful thing on the market, but it holds up pretty well if you're not into gaming, and in fact, you're probably going to find it great. I actually played a ton of Rovercraft on this phone, and they didn't sponsor this video or anything, by the way. It's just honestly a really fun game in my opinion. And while it's true, that game isn't super demanding like Battlegrounds or Fortnite, it actually performed really well, and the only time the phone ever really felt slow was if I was playing that and trying to talk to somebody in a Facebook Messenger chat head over top of the game. Not to mention, this thing never really got hot, which can be pretty uncomfortable. It stayed quite cool all the time. Aside from the solid performance, the combination of a mid-tier processor and a pretty decent-sized battery resulted in excellent battery life. Seriously, one weekend I spent over 4 hours playing Rovercraft and watching Netflix all in one day, and not only did it not kill the phone, I ended up with a total of over 7 hours of screen on time before it finally died that night. Think about that. Over 7 hours of use, and over 4 hours of that is gaming. That's seriously impressive. And ever since I switched back to my Galaxy S7, I have definitely missed the Q Stylo Plus's awesome battery life. Also, I can't think of a good way to make a joke about how embarrassingly long I used my phone that day, but hey, it was a weekend. As far as the screen goes, I felt this was a big jump over the Stylo 3 Plus. And I can't really tell you why off the spec sheet, because it's a pretty similar resolution, but I just thought it looked a lot better. Maybe I'm misremembering. It's true, it's not going to match the latest iPhone or Samsung phone or even LG's top-of-the-line offerings, but I think it's really crisp and it just looks great. Above the screen, you'll find the notification LED, which disappointingly is still not RGB, but rather only red. It's really not a big deal, and I did get used to it pretty quickly, but at first I constantly thought the phone was dying because it was blinking red. Again, not a big deal. But I do think it would be a little better if they shelled out for the RGB LED instead. There's not much to say on the RAM. Like I said, I had no issues with performance, and games seemed to stay in memory as long as I didn't close them pretty well. So the 3 GB was plenty for my use, and while 32 GB of internal storage is a little low, it makes perfect sense for a phone at this price range, and having the option of throwing in a micro SD card is really great. This phone does feature a fingerprint sensor on the back, which I find really fast and in a comfortable position. I honestly didn't notice any difference in speed in this sensor versus the one on the G7 ThinQ. It's great, and if you prefer a fingerprint sensor on the front for the on-a-desk experience, use double tap to wake. It's a nice feature, and it helps to mitigate the fact that the sensor's on the back. Also, I love that the fingerprint sensor can be used like a little touchpad to pull down the notification screen. This isn't something completely new, it's been on a few phones like the Pixel, but I find it really nice. I have relatively big hands, but I find the top 10 or 20% of the screen is pretty tricky to reach one-handed, and swiping the notifications and the quick settings down with my index finger over the fingerprint sensor is awesome, and seriously reduced the number of times where I did that thing where I try to reach the top of the phone and the phone just kind of flops over in my hand. To charge the phone, you'll find a pretty quick USB-C port on the bottom next to the headphone jack and speaker grill, and on the sides, you'll find the volume buttons, lock button, and the SD card/SIM tray. This phone does not feature the LG G7's dedicated Google Assistant button, which is just fine by me because I thought it was kind of pointless anyway. Moving on to the cameras, I have to admit I kind of barely used them. On a phone in this price range, I generally kind of just expect them to be meh, but it's really not that bad. The camera won't have particularly quick low-light performance, so if you're looking to use it to capture blink-and-you'll-miss-it shots of your kids or your pets, it might not be the best one for you, but if you have good lighting, a steady hand, and a non-moving subject, you should get decent pictures. Here are some comparison shots with my Galaxy S7. I did find that the shots from the Stylo were often kind of washed out in comparison to the S7, and certainly the low light performance isn't that great, but that's pretty much expected for a phone in this price range. The last thing we have to talk about today is the phone's namesake, the stylus. Truth be told, I didn't use the special features of the stylus very much, but there are some cool ones. One I think is pretty sweet is how you can take the stylus out when the screen is off, and it'll open a note-taking screen so you can quickly jot something down and then put your phone away. If the phone is unlocked when you take the pen out, it'll open a menu of features you can use with the stylus. These include sticky note-like memos, a screenshot tool that lets you take regular screenshots, scrolling screenshots, which is when you hit the scroll button and it extends your screenshot down further than what you can see on the screen. So for example, if you were on Facebook, you could screenshot your whole feed if you really felt like it. As well as a custom shaped screenshot, which is where you just draw around the thing you want to capture, and GIF screenshots. There's also a dedicated shortcut for the aforementioned Gif Capture, a magnifying glass that you can move around the screen, adjust the size of, and use pinch to zoom with, and even apply weird filters with, and you can add a shortcut to whatever app you'd like to this menu. This menu is also where you'll see the off-screen memos I mentioned before, and a convenient shortcut to the section of the settings menu that's for the stylus, which lets you disable opening of this menu when you take the stylus out if you want to. There's still no fancy tech in the stylus, like the ability to detect when it's above the screen, or pressure sensitivity, or even just whether a touch is from your body or the stylus, like the Galaxy Note series can do, which means that you can't rest your hand on the screen while using the stylus. In terms of functionality, it's pretty much just like a regular stylus for touchscreens, but it's pretty thin and sturdy, and it doesn't have that gummy bit at the end that generic touch stylus usually have. It's also stored inside the phone, which is nice. And those are all big pluses in my opinion. I would definitely say this is better than just your standard stylus for those features, even though functionally there's not a lot more that it does. And I definitely do think that somebody who's talented and patient could still do some pretty cool art with it. Overall, I think the only real downside of the stylus, besides the fact that I would like to see some of those features borrowed from the Galaxy Note series, even if they're not necessities, is that it can be a little tricky to line up properly when you go to put it back in the phone, although I did get used to it fast. So, what's my overall opinion? I think this is an excellent phone. Yeah, the processor might be a little meh on paper, but the actual performance is great. Battery life is probably the best of any phone I've ever personally used. In fact, it's probably the best feature of this phone. It's terrific. The build quality is dramatically improved and feels a lot more premium in my opinion, though of course not quite at flagship levels. It's honestly not far off at all. And there's a decent camera and a pretty cool stylus that could be a little bit better, but is still really solid. Plus, water resistance, and at this price range that's really cool. So, as long as you're not looking for flagship gaming performance or camera, I don't think you can go wrong here. In my opinion, if you're okay with those two things, you should jump on this phone. Anyway guys, that's it for me. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and all that jazz. And if you want to buy this phone or other cool stuff, please check out my Amazon affiliate links in the video description, and I'll get a small kickback when you buy. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram, and the links in the video description. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.